There is a text message on your phone that you sent 3 weeks ago. You can see it there marked as delivered, the timestamp frozen in a moment that now feels like ancient history. You had written something simple, something that required only acknowledgement, perhaps just a single word in return, but there is nothing. The screen glows with your own words reflected back at you unanswered, hanging in digital suspension like a question asked into a void that swallows sound. You call once, twice. Understanding these paths does not erase the pain of being left, but it transforms the quality of that pain, moves it from the sharp confusion of why me, toward the softer, more bearable territory of this was never about me. The first traveler on this road is the one who learned early that conflict is not conversation, but catastrophe. In the coffee shop where you used to meet, there is a chair that remains empty. You see it every time you walk past the window. The table is the same, the afternoon light falls across it in the same golden slant, but the presence that once filled that space has evaporated. Not dramatically, not with the crash and shatter of an argument, but with the quiet disappearance of morning fog. One day they were there, and then they were not, and the transition between these two states happened in a silence so complete it left no evidence of its passing. This is not the sharp pain of a door slammed in your face. This is the dull, persistent ache of a door left ajar, creaking slightly, in a draft you cannot locate. You cannot move forward because you do not know if you are supposed to wait or to go. You cannot grieve properly because you do not know if there is something to grieve. The relationship exists in a state of suspension, neither alive nor definitively dead, and you are trapped in the terrible ambiguity of not knowing which funeral to attend. The questions circle in your mind like birds that cannot find a place to land. What happened? What did I do? What did I fail to do? Did I misread everything? Was there a moment I missed a sign I should have seen? A conversation I should have initiated? The uncertainty becomes a weight you carry through your days, pressing against your chest. When you wake, sitting beside you as you work, following you into the moments before sleep. You replay the last conversation you had together, searching for clues the way archaeologists search ruins for meaning. Every word is examined, turned over, held up to the light. Was there coldness in their voice you failed to notice? Did their smile reach their eyes? You become a detective of your own memory, but memories are unreliable witnesses, changing shape each time you revisit them, offering no solid ground. The cruelest part is the absence of an ending. Stories are supposed to have conclusions, resolutions, the moment when the music swells and credits roll, or the chapter closes with a final sentence that makes sense of all that came before. But this story simply stops mid-paragraph, the narrative abandoned, without explanation, leaving you standing in the middle of a plot that has no resolution. You are a character written out of someone else's story without being told the story is over. People tell you to move on, to let go, to accept what is. But how do you let go of something you never properly held? How do you accept an ending that was never declared? The door remains open just enough that you can see light through the crack, just enough that closing it yourself feels like giving up, like betraying some unspoken agreement that maybe, possibly, they might return to explain. What you are experiencing is not simple sadness. It is the particular grief that comes from ambiguity, from relationships that end not with a period but with an ellipsis that stretches into infinity. And what you do not yet understand is that the person who walked away in silence is not necessarily cruel, not necessarily indifferent, not necessarily unaffected by their own disappearance. Behind every silent departure is a psychology more complex than abandonment, a human story more nuanced than rejection. Today we step into the interior world of those who choose to leave without words, and the unspoken grief they carry with them into their silence. The instinct is to judge. When someone vanishes from your life without explanation, the mind reaches for the simplest narrative, the one that assigns clear roles and clear blame. They are selfish, they are cowardly, they are cruel. These labels arrive quickly, offering the comfort of comprehension, the relief of having someone to be angry at. Anger, after all, is easier to metabolize than confusion. But beneath the initial sting of abandonment, beneath the reflexive need to make them the villain of your story, there exists a territory less explored, less comfortable, and far more true. What if the silence was not an act of power, but an admission of powerlessness? What if the disappearance was not indifference, but its opposite? A collapse under the weight of caring too much and too long with too little return. Consider the word ghosting. It has become casual slang, a term thrown around to describe the modern phenomenon of digital disappearance. But it flattens something far more textured into a single dimension, reduces a complex human behavior into a character flaw, a generational failing, a symptom of our disposable culture. What we are examining here is not ghosting in its shallow definition. This is something older, deeper, more universally human. This is what happens when a person reaches the absolute limit of their emotional capacity and finds that words which once seemed like bridges now feel like weapons they no longer have the strength to wield. Psychologists have a term for what often precedes these silent departures, though it is rarely discussed in the context of relationships ending: emotional exhaustion, withdrawal. It is the response of a nervous system that has been flooded beyond its threshold, a protective shutdown that occurs not from a single traumatic event, but from the accumulated weight of 1,000 small, unmet needs, 1,000 moments of feeling unseen, unheard, unmatched in effort or care. Every human being has a threshold of endurance that is invisible to others and sometimes even to themselves. It is not a line drawn in advance, but a boundary discovered only by crossing it. The person who leaves silently is often someone with an extraordinarily high threshold, someone who has absorbed impact after impact, disappointment after disappointment, who has made excuse after excuse for the imbalance they feel. They are the ones who said it's fine when it was not fine, who smiled through discomfort, who initiated the conversations that kept the relationship breathing when it wanted to stop. They tried. This is the truth that gets lost in the narrative of their disappearance. They tried to communicate their needs, but the words dissolved in the air, between you, landing nowhere, changing nothing. They tried to explain what hurt, but the explanations were met with defensiveness or dismissal, or the exhausting requirement to prove their feelings were legitimate. They tried to hope that things would shift, that the pattern would break, that one day the effort would be mutual. And when none of that happened, when the same dynamics repeated in endless variation, something inside them made a calculation that felt less like a choice and more like a biological imperative. Survival requires distance. The final departure, which seems sudden to you, is the visible tip of a process that has been unfolding beneath the surface for months, perhaps years. Each unreciprocated text, each conversation where they felt like they were speaking a language you did not understand, each time they swallowed their disappointment to preserve the peace, was a single grain of sand added to a scale. You did not see the scale, you did not know it existed, but they felt its weight increasing with each passing week until the day the balance tipped, and they simply could not carry it anymore. What looks like cruelty from the outside is often capitulation from the inside. Not the surrender of not caring, but the surrender of caring so much that it became unsustainable. There are 5 archetypal journeys that lead a person into silent departure, 5 interior landscapes that produce the same external outcome but originate from entirely different emotional geographies. Understanding these paths does not erase the pain of being left, but it transforms the quality of that pain, moves it from the sharp confusion of why me toward the softer, more bearable territory of this was never about me. The first traveler on this road is the one who learned early that conflict is not conversation, but catastrophe. And when none of that happened, when the same dynamics repeated in endless variation, something inside them made a calculation that felt less like a choice and more like a biological imperative. Survival requires distance. The final departure, which seems sudden to you, is the visible tip of a process that has been unfolding beneath the surface for months, perhaps years. For this person, a conversation meant to clear the air is not an opportunity, but a minefield. Your invitation to talk, extended with the best intentions, lands on them like a threat. They do not trust that difficult words can be exchanged without destruction. They do not believe that you want dialogue. They believe you want a fight, and they have spent their entire lives avoiding fights by making themselves smaller, quieter, less present. When the relationship begins to fray, when issues accumulate that genuinely need addressing, they face an impossible choice: speak and risk the detonation, or leave and preserve the peace. They choose the latter not because they do not care, but because to them, silence is the only form of safety they have ever known. Then there is the person who gave and gave and gave until the well inside them ran dry. They are the ones who remember your birthday when you forget theirs, who check in when you vanish for weeks, who carry the emotional labor of the relationship on their shoulders like a pack that grows heavier with each passing month. They initiate the conversations that keep connection alive. They ask how you are and mean it. They notice when you are distant, and they reach out again and again, building bridges toward you while you stand still. But there is a limit to how long one person can sustain a relationship designed for two. There is a threshold beyond which reaching out stops feeling like connection and starts feeling like begging. They have tried to tell you this not always in direct words, but in the subtle language of exhaustion, in the pauses that grew longer, in the texts that took days to compose, because they were searching for a way to say, "I need you to meet me," halfway, without sounding demanding or needy or dramatic. But you did not hear, or you heard, and did not adjust. And eventually, they stopped trying to make you understand. Their silence is not punishment. It is the recognition of a reality they can no longer deny, that no amount of explaining will change the fundamental imbalance that some people are takers and some are givers, and the roles have calcified beyond reformation. When they leave without words, it is because all the words have already been spent, scattered like seeds on concrete, and they have finally accepted that nothing will grow here. The third path belongs to those who leave because staying has become dangerous. They do not say goodbye because the goodbye would require them to explain why they are leaving, and the explanation would expose the self-loathing they work so hard to hide. They imagine that if they simply fade away, you will eventually forget them or remember them more kindly than they remember themselves. They do not say goodbye because the goodbye would require them to explain why they are leaving, and the explanation would expose the self-loathing they work so hard to hide. They imagine that if they simply fade away, you will eventually forget them or remember them more kindly than they remember themselves. It opens the door to being talked out of their own reality, to having their perceptions twisted until they doubt what they know to be true. Or worse, it invites retaliation, the scorched earth response of someone who would rather destroy what they cannot keep. So they plan in secret, they withdraw incrementally, and when the moment comes, they disappear as completely as possible, because disappearance is the only exit that does not require negotiation with someone who has already proven negotiation is impossible. This is not cruelty. This is triage. This is a person saving their own life in the only way available to them. Others walk away silently because they carry a weight of shame so profound they cannot articulate it. They believe in some deep and unexamined chamber of themselves that they are the problem, that their presence is a burden, that the relationship suffers because of their fundamental inadequacy. They are depressed or anxious or struggling with issues they cannot name, and they convince themselves that their absence will be a gift, that you will be better off without the heaviness they bring. So they plan in secret, they withdraw incrementally, and when the moment comes, they disappear as completely as possible, because disappearance is the only exit that does not require negotiation with someone who has already proven negotiation is impossible. This is not cruelty. This is triage. This is a person saving their own life in the only way available to them. Others walk away silently because they carry a weight of shame so profound they cannot articulate it. They do not understand that their silence inflicts a different kind of wound, that the mystery of their departure creates a pain more enduring than any honest confession of struggle would have caused. They vanish, not to hurt you, but to spare you, though the mathematics of their compassion is tragically miscalculated. And finally, there is the person who has outgrown the relationship, who has evolved or transformed in ways that have created a chasm too wide to bridge with words. They have changed their values, their priorities, their understanding of who they are and what they need. They look at the relationship and see a beautiful artifact from a previous version of themselves, something that once fit perfectly, but now constricts like clothing from childhood. They know that explaining this evolution will sound like judgment. How do you tell someone I am no longer the person you knew without implying, and you have not grown? How do you say, our paths have diverged without it sounding like you were not enough to make me stay? They are caught between honesty that will wound and silence that will confuse, and they choose silence because it feels like the lesser violence. They disappear not because they do not value what you shared, but because they do not know how to honor the past while claiming the future they need. 5 paths, 5 different interior logics, all leading to the same external result. The person left behind experiences the same abandonment regardless of which path was taken. But the person who left carries their own specific suffering, their own reasons that made sense in the desperate moment of choosing. There is a particular species of loss that has no name in casual conversation, though psychologists have mapped its territory. Ambiguous loss, they call it. It is the grief that comes when someone is gone, but not definitively gone, when there is no funeral to attend, no final conversation to remember, no moment when you can point and say that is when it ended. It is loss without the rituals that humans have developed over millennia to metabolize endings without the communal acknowledgement that yes, something precious has died and you are permitted to mourn it. The person left behind inhabits this strange country where the lost relationship is neither fully present nor fully absent. They exist in a state of perpetual, maybe scanning their phone for messages that will never arrive, constructing explanations from insufficient evidence, cycling through hope and resignation in exhausting rotation. They cannot properly grieve because to grieve requires acceptance of finality, and finality is precisely what has been withheld. The door remains open just enough to prevent closure, but not enough to permit re-entry. This pain is real. It is not melodrama or weakness or an inability to move on. It is the natural human response to being left in narrative suspension, to having a story end mid-sentence with no punctuation to signal whether it is a pause or a conclusion. The mind abhors uncertainty the way nature abhors a vacuum. It will fill the silence with speculation, with self-blame, with elaborate theories that attempt to make sense of what may have no sense to make. This is not pathology. This is the mind doing what minds do when denied resolution. But there is another grief, one that rarely receives acknowledgement, one that unfolds in complete isolation without witnesses or sympathy. The person who left silently is also mourning. This is the truth that the abandoned rarely consider, and understandably so. How can the person who caused the pain also claim to be in pain? How can the one who walked away also grieve the walking away? Yet they do. They carry their loss in solitude without the comfort that usually accompanies grief, without friends gathering to say you did the right thing or their loss, not yours. Instead, they are cast as the villain, the ghost, the coward. They see themselves discussed in group chats. They are no longer part of their character dissected, their motivations assigned by people who do not know the full story, because they could not find the words to tell it. They lie awake at 3 a.m, thinking about you, wondering if you are okay, wanting to reach out, but knowing that reaching out now would only reopen wounds or create false hope. They scroll past your name in their contacts, their thumb hovering over the call button before they pull back, remembering why they left, remembering that leaving was necessary even if it was not kind. They see something that would have made you laugh and have no one to share it with because you are gone and they are the reason you are gone. They are grieving not just the loss of you, but the loss of who they were when they were with you, the version of themselves that existed in that relationship, the shared history that now sits archived in memory with no one to reminisce with. They have lost a companion, a witness to their life, a person who knew their stories and their references and the specific way they take their coffee. All of that is gone, and they are the architect of its disappearance. But their grief has no social permission. They cannot post about it, cannot call friends and cry, cannot expect sympathy when they are the one who chose this. Society offers comfort to the abandoned, not to those who do the abandoning, even when the abandoning was an act of self-preservation, even when staying would have been a slower form of dying. So they mourn alone in the margins of their days, carrying a sadness they are not allowed to name. Two people, two separate griefs, both valid, both real, both suffering the loss of the same relationship from different sides of an invisible wall. The tragedy is not that one pain is worse than the other. The tragedy is that these two pains cannot acknowledge each other, cannot offer mutual comfort, cannot transform the ending into something bearable through shared understanding. There comes a moment in the long stretch of waiting when you must make a choice that no one can make for you. You can continue to stand at the threshold of a door that will not fully open, or you can decide that your peace does not require their explanation, that your healing does not need their permission. This is not about forgiveness or understanding or making sense of what happened. This is about the simple, difficult recognition that you cannot build a life while waiting for someone else to tell you the story is over. The answers you seek may never come. This is a truth that tastes bitter, that the mind resists with every argument it can construct. Surely they owe you an explanation. Surely you deserve to know what went wrong. Surely closure requires their participation. But closure is not something another person gives you like a gift wrapped in clarity. Closure is a decision you make about when to stop asking questions that have no available answers, when to stop refreshing a conversation that has already ended, when to accept that some stories conclude with blank pages rather than proper epilogues. There is a ritual you can perform alone in the privacy of your own healing. Take a piece of paper or open a blank document and write everything you would say if they were listening. Write the questions that circle your mind at night. Write the anger, the confusion, the grief, the things you wish you had said when there was still time to say them. Write the alternative ending you wish had happened, the conversation where everything was explained and understood and resolved with mutual respect. Pour it all onto the page until your hands are tired and your heart feels slightly lighter. Then do not send it. This letter is not for them. This letter is your voice finally speaking into the silence, your way of saying the goodbye they never gave you. You are creating the ending yourself because waiting for them to provide it has become another form of imprisonment. You are allowed to decide that their silence is the final answer, that the relationship is over, not because they declared it so, but because you are declaring it now. You are allowed to close a door that someone else left open. This is not giving up. This is taking authorship of your own story, refusing to be a character frozen in someone else's unfinished chapter. The narrative continues, but you are the one writing it now, and the first sentence of this new chapter begins with acceptance of what is, rather than longing for what was. And if you are the person who has left others behind in silence, if you recognize yourself in the psychology of disappearance, there is work here for you as well. The pattern will repeat until you examine the fear that drives it. What are you really avoiding when you vanish without words? Is it conflict? Or is it the deeper terror of being seen as imperfect, of being the source of disappointment, of having to witness pain you have caused? These are questions that require sitting with discomfort, that demand you stay present to feelings you have spent years learning to escape. Consider that there is a middle path between staying in relationships that harm you and disappearing without trace. A single message, brief and clear, is not a betrayal of your need for distance. I cannot continue this relationship, and I need space is a complete sentence. It does not require elaborate justification or willingness to debate or exposure of your deepest vulnerabilities. It is simply an act of acknowledging that another person is real, that their confusion has weight, that endings can be honored even when they cannot be fully explained. The discomfort of sending such a message, of knowing they may respond with pain or anger or pleas for explanation, is real. But discomfort is not danger. Learning to tolerate the feeling of being briefly uncomfortable, of allowing someone to be upset with you, of sitting with the guilt that comes from prioritizing your own needs, is part of the architecture of mature relationships. The narrative continues, but you are the one writing it now, and the first sentence of this new chapter begins with acceptance of what is, rather than longing for what was. And if you are the person who has left others behind in silence, if you recognize yourself in the psychology of disappearance, there is work here for you as well. The pattern will repeat until you examine the fear that drives it. The smallest gesture of closure, uncomfortable as it may be to deliver, can be the difference between someone spending months in confusion and someone who, though hurt, can begin the work of healing immediately. Life does not often provide the endings we see in films, where every thread is tied, every question answered, every character given a moment to speak their truth before the music swells and the screen fades to black. Real endings are messier, more ambiguous, stitched together from silence and assumption, and the gradual acceptance that some chapters close without a final paragraph. We are taught to expect resolution, to believe that every story deserves a proper conclusion, but perhaps the deeper lesson is learning to make peace with incompleteness, to find meaning not in how things end, but in what they meant while they lasted. The person who walked away without explanation has left you with a gap in the narrative, a blank space where closure should be. But that blank space, painful as it is, also becomes a kind of mirror. In the absence of their reasons, you are forced to construct your own understanding, to decide for yourself what the relationship meant, what you learned, who you became because of it. This is lonely work, but it is also powerful work. You are no longer dependent on someone else to tell you the meaning of your own experience. The story is yours now, and you get to decide how to carry it forward. There is a temptation in the aftermath of silent departures to let the ending define everything, to allow the pain of how it finished to erase the beauty of what existed before. But relationships are not only their conclusions. The laughter you shared was real. The comfort you found in each other's presence was genuine. The moments of connection, however, many or few, were not made false by the fact that they eventually ended. Nothing that helped you grow, nothing that brought you joy, nothing that taught you something about yourself or the world can be retroactively erased by silence. Perhaps the final gift of someone who leaves quietly is this: they teach you that love and connection are strong enough to survive even imperfect endings. The relationship may have concluded without ceremony, but its impact remains written into you. You carry forward the lessons, the memories, the ways in which knowing them changed the architecture of who you are. They are gone, but the version of yourself that existed because of them, that grew because of them, that learned resilience or compassion or boundaries through the experience of losing them, that version remains. The echo of what was shared does not require their presence to continue reverberating. You can honor what the relationship gave you while also releasing the person who is no longer in it. You can hold gratitude for the good and acceptance for the ending in the same breath. You can acknowledge that they mattered without needing them to return and confirm it. The love was real. The loss is real. Both can be true simultaneously. Healing does not mean forgetting or minimizing or pretending it did not hurt. Healing means learning to live with the echo instead of the silence, choosing to remember the music that played rather than fixating on the abruptness of its stopping. It means recognizing that you survived something difficult, that you are still here, still capable of connection, still willing to let people matter, even though mattering sometimes leads to pain. In the end, the people who leave quietly are teaching the same lesson as those who stay and struggle through difficult conversations. They are teaching that relationships are temporal, that nothing lasts forever in the form it begins, that change and loss are built into the very structure of human connection. What varies is only the method of departure, not the fundamental truth that all things end and we must learn to bear it. You are learning to bear it now. In the space between what was and what comes next, in the territory of unanswered questions and incomplete stories, you are discovering that you are strong enough to write your own ending, to find your own peace to carry forward, not the silence they left, but the echo of what mattered. And that echo, faint as it may sometimes feel, is enough to build a future on.